welcome back for another one of these Friday videos where we just kind of chit-chat about whatever witchy thing I decided to talk about this week. Sometimes they're requested, sometimes they're just things that I've thought about. And after doing the Pride Month videos, thinking about all things, I was like, you know what? One of the central things that kind of kept coming up and kind of just kept playing on my brain since the very first one, the very first video for Pride Month last month, the very first one has been still on my brain, and that is mythology. As you guessed by the title of this video, can and should we have our myths change? Should our gods change over time? Quick answer, yeah. There's more though. We'll go into three kind of major themes, but basically yes, they should. So first of all, this will obviously piss off all of the Reconstructionist pagans. So if you're a Reconstructionist, if you think that our ancestors had everything figured out somehow, some way, truly don't understand you, but whatever. If you think they had it all right, again, I don't agree with you. But if that's your case, this is not for you. You should leave now. And I can see the analytics, so if you don't leave right around this time point, it's on you. You're not a Reconstructionist pagan. If you don't know what that means, basically, you want to reconstruct the ancient pagan practices as much as physically possible into the modern era. Everything has to be cited from an ancient source, and you cannot use any of the modern interpretations. It all is very academically based in what evidence we have of what our ancestors actually did, not modern interpretations, modern way of doing things. And of course, there is the legality of that, but you know, we just kind of ignore that part with the Reconstructionists. So, anyways, they're not my favorite. Anyways, on to modern paganism. Let's go. So the first major thing is that when we change our myths, it is to find our current identities. Now, there's obviously, from Pride Month, if you readjust the myths just a little bit, pretty much every single variant within the queer community you can be found. And so that is usually where the myths kind of get adjusted, but there's other reasons as well. But like for me, when I'm looking for like ace deities, it's kind of nice to be like, you know, there's not a whole lot, but there's a couple, and it's nice to see myself there. And if you are gay, if you're trans, and you can find yourself in these myths, it can make you feel more valid. It can make you feel seen, that you matter, and that you have a deity who can understand your struggles more intimately, and it just makes you feel more supported. Now, also, that can kind of range drastically, because also, your job, for instance, there's not a lot of jobs that our ancestors did that still apply to the modern world, and they've changed a lot over this time, but you know, if you work with a deity who rules over like poetry and you're a writer, you know, it's kind of the same vibe. But if you are like an accountant, you're gonna have to stretch some myths a little bit. I don't think there's a god of accounting, you know? Like, you're gonna have to get a little more creative. Some are kind of easy, healer types, you know, there's always like the healer of any mythology. Bridget, Isis, there's a lot that are very easy to be like, oh yeah, that's the one. But some of the others, it stretches a little bit, and it's hard. For instance, I don't know of any deity that has like the surrogate, especially as the intended parent side. I have not found that myth yet. That would be cool if I could, but I don't know that that exists because that was not like a thing. I don't even think they thought about that in the ancient world. But you know, even trying to find like great foster and adoption stories in the myths without, again, the pushback to the biological line as the best thing ever, again, as the intended parent side, that sucks. So trying to find that, equally difficult. So when you find it, and you're like, oh my god, because also verbiage, like Lou is often referring to his adoptive mom as his foster mom. Was she still a foster? Was it really more of an adoption? You know? So stuff like that, where you try to adjust these myths into the modern world, and you try and see yourself there. Also, just modern struggles. A lot of people will look at a lot of the war deities and will relate that to their own inner battles with like chronic illness or with mental health. A lot of people who battle like with trauma and depression and anxiety gravitate to the more war deities like the Morrigan. Very popular for the mentally ill. Like, and even Odin. Like, there's a lot that people gravitate towards, but war is not really, I mean, it is for some parts of the world, which is truly horrific, and I really feel bad for you if you're in that place. I don't know what I can do to help you, but it sucks. It sucks really bad. We're in the modern world, we shouldn't be having this. But for the most part, the majority of people watching this, we're not in actual war zones. Most of us are living our day-to-day lives, and it's just a constant of like, ugh. But for the most part, we're not really dealing with the horrific life of war. Again, it still exists in the world, still sucks so fucking bad. But most of us are not there, right? And so we kind of take these war deities, where war was very, very common for our pagan ancestors. Very common. Like, every freaking tribe ever in the history of humanity has fought against each other because resources were limited. They just were assholes. Like, it just, you know. So modernly, we kind of adjust those myths and the theme to other parts of our lives and easily switch them over to match our modern world. Because again, like a god of justice, in the past that justice might have been like a duel, right? But in the modern world, it might be like winning a court case kind of a thing. Whatever it is, changing the myths to fit our current identities is huge. Again, go here every single time. Actually, with both of them, every single time. But like Persephone and Loki, their myths have changed kind of a lot. And so Persephone was once considered to be kidnapped, and now we view it more as she is liberating herself from being just Demeter's daughter. Is that a bad change? No. Like, it doesn't really change anything for anyone, right? Like, it's just a story we tell ourselves about the deities. But a lot of people can relate to that, where you don't want to just be in your parents' shadow all the time, and you want to make a name for yourself, right? And you want to be this duality of life and death, which there's a lot of options in mythology for that. But, you know, really we see that with Persephone's story, and also with Loki, and how a lot of the more traditional, like, Reconstructionist people kind of view Loki's just kind of a weird one, where, and I've thought about this a lot. Loki doesn't, like, every other shape-shifting myth that I've stumbled across so far, they don't change their gender when they transform. Caradwen, when she changes into, like, everything ever, chasing after the poor guy who ends up taking the spell instead of what was intended for her son, and she's chasing him down. They're constantly shape-shifting. They're maintaining their genders as they do this. Changing creatures, yes. Gender, no. Loki, yes. Loki, instead of where, like, Thor dresses in drag, but not really drag, he just cross-dresses to pretend to be Freya. Loki actually shapeshifts into a woman to be the, like, handmaid to Freya, aka Thor. But Thor doesn't change. He could have, obviously. I mean, in the myths, there's no way he couldn't have done that. He didn't want to. Loki, zero problem. Also is a mother. Multiple stories. Loki is a mother and a father. And we can really look at these myths and be like, oh, well, like, it was viewed bad, and like Odin was considered like doing feminine magic, but modernly we could really adjust that and be like, but is it now? Like, is it really? Or, which leads into our next point, is it just old bias that should be left to the sands of time? Sexism has existed throughout humanity, and it's stupid and really not helpful to anyone involved. And so there's a lot of that in our myths that we could just leave to the past. There's so many things that our ancestors did that were dumb and terrible and horrible. Nobody should be, like, doing any kind of animal abuse. A lot of our ancestors did that. They sacrificed animals for stupid reasons. Don't hurt animals. That's dumb. Just, like, don't do that. Like, it truly boggles the brain when you think about it, but, like, yeah, don't do that. We don't need to do that. We don't need to sacrifice. Thor does not need a dead goat, I promise you. You can just pour him a glass of beer and he's perfectly fine. And, you know, also human sacrifice, obviously, very illegal all over the world. Don't do that. And then also, our ancestors heavily included slavery and against sexism. People were not treated fairly. We could leave that to the sands of time, and any of the myths that have that, let's bring it into the modern era. Let's change things, change the narrative. We don't need to maintain it because, and that actually leads to our third and final point, we don't know what was actually written down. The stories written down were never accurately written down, ever. It has always had a bias. It is a cultural bias of where it was written, who it was written down by, who it's been translated by. Every single part of it has changed, and a lot of it was deliberate. When Christianity took over the globe, they made it a mission to obliterate everything not Christian. Every part of the globe, you look at indigenous cultures, whether it is the indigenous tribes that were in Europe, they did exist, they're gone. Our ancestors who were like the Irish, the Welsh, the Norse, these old cultures, these old tribes, these old belief systems were obliterated, intentionally obliterated. Christians didn't want that in the day. And so now we're left with random fragments. And what was written down, we know had a bias. Loki was pinned as the devil figure because they needed a devil figure. And I'm sure a lot of the Native American tribes all across the continent here, they had their cultures obliterated. Some of it has survived, but I'm sure there's a lot that was lost. That, again, as Christianity took over, you weren't allowed to have that anymore. They took it away. And so we don't really have a full picture. And also, why couldn't our gods change like we have? Unlike in Christianity, where the God is infallible, he has no need to change, he's perfect. Obviously. You just read the book and you're like, yeah, this is a guy I want to follow. But he doesn't supposedly change, right? God's just everything all the time, all the ways ever, yeah. The pagan gods aren't, though. The pagan gods are very much more down to acknowledge they're wrong. And that's what makes them so, like, desirable for a lot of people. The gods are not perfect. They make mistakes. The point is, we look at these myths to learn from their mistakes and adjust them. And so why would we not adjust the lessons of the past to bring it into the modern era? Because again, we don't even know any of it was completely accurate to what our ancestors actually believed. That definitely changed over time. And again, it's known bias. We know the Christian monks writing down the pagan stories were not doing it to be as historically accurate as possible. They weren't even alive. Like, the peoples were already killed off. The culture was killed off. And then they're trying to write it down. And then it changes. And translations. And if you've ever tried to learn 2 languages or more, words don't always translate over properly. And you're like, what? And then if you do that time over and over again, and you have significant changes to culture anyways, the nuance gets lost. And so myths change. And I think it's a good thing. Because again, for me, I love that Hel can be my icon for asexuality. She doesn't marry, she doesn't have kids, she's doing her own thing. She is like the queen of being an arrow ace. She is thriving as a queen all unto herself. She doesn't need nobody. And yet also I love that Loki is like, for like the trans and gender fluid community, a lot of people love him for that, or I guess them for that. Usually the pronoun given to him is him, but you could argue otherwise. But you know, there's so many options when we readjust our myths, we look at them a little differently, and you know what? It's okay. It's actually really cool to see how we can make these ancient stories that were already biased and were from times we don't want to return to, and bring it into the modern world. So anyways, I would love to know your thoughts on this in the comments down below. A huge thank you to my patrons. If you would like to support me and get access to a bunch of stuff, it's patreon.com/nightwillowcrafts. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I post every single day, and until next time, blessed be.